Hello, this is John T. Rhapsodies Esquire, Purveyor of Awesome Old School Audio Stories, bringing you a story today from 1913 called The Nest Egg by James Whitcomb Riley. Riley walked the earth from 1849 to 1916, mostly in Indiana. In addition to short stories, Riley published over 1,000 poems in a Midwestern Hoosier dialect, including his 1885 poem which served to inspire the comic strip Little Orphan Annie. One question arising from this story is, have you ever heard of a nest egg like the one in the story? Hear the words of old. A Nest Egg, from 1913, by James Whitcomb Riley. But a few miles from the city here, and on the sloping banks of the stream noted more for its plenitude of chubs and shiners than the gamier 2- and 4-pound bass, for which, in season, so many credulous anglers flock and lie in wait, stands a country residence, so convenient to the stream, and so inviting in its pleasant exterior and comfortable surroundings, barn, dairy, and springhouse, that the weary, sunburnt, and disheartened fisherman, out from the dusty town for a day of recreation, is often wont to seek its hospitality. The house, in style of architecture, is something of a departure from the typical farmhouse, being designed and fashioned with no regard to symmetry or proportion, but rather, as is suggested, built to conform to the matter-of-fact and most sensible ideas of its owner, who, if it pleased him, would have small windows where large ones ought to be, and vice versa, whether they balanced properly to the eye or not. And chimneys. The owner would have as many as he wanted, and no two alike, in either height or size. And if he wanted the front of the house turned from all possible view, as though abashed at any chance of public scrutiny, why, that was his affair, and not the public's. And, with like perverseness, if he chose to thrust his kitchen under the public's very nose, what should the half-famished representative of that dignified public do, but reel in his dead minnow, shoulder his fishing rod, clamber over the back fence of the old farmhouse, and inquire within, or jog back to the city, inwardly anathematizing that very particular locality, or the whole rural district in general. That is just the way that farmhouse looked to the writer of this sketch 1 week ago. So individual it seemed, so liberal, and yet so independent. It wasn't even weatherboarded, but, instead, was covered smoothly with some cement, as though the plasterers had come while the folks were visiting, and so, unable to get at the interior, had just plastered the outside. I am more than glad that I was hungry enough, and weary enough, and wise enough to take the house at its first suggestion, for, putting away my fishing tackle for the morning at least, I went up the sloping bank, crossed the dusty road, and confidently clambered over the fence. Not even a growling dog to intimate that I was trespassing. All was open, gracious-looking pastoral. The sward beneath my feet was velvet-like in elasticity, and the scarce visible path I followed through it led promptly to the open kitchen door. From within, I heard a woman singing some old ballad in an undertone, while at the threshold a trim, white-spurred rooster stood poised on one foot, curving his glossy neck and cocking his wattled head as though to catch the meaning of the words. I paused. It was a scene I felt restrained from breaking in upon, nor would I, but for the sound of a strong male voice coming around the corner of the house. "Howdy, sir." Turning, I saw a rough-looking but kindly featured man of 65, the evident owner of the place. I returned his salutation with some confusion and much deference. "I must really beg your pardon for this intrusion," I began, "but I have been tiring myself out fishing, and your home here looks so pleasant, and I felt so thirsty, and—" "Want a drink, I reckon," said the old man, turning abruptly toward the kitchen door, then pausing as suddenly, with a backward motion of his thumb, said, "Just follow the path here down to the little brick. That's the spring, and you'll find that you've come to the right place for drinking water. Hold on a minute till I get you a tumbler. There's nothing down there but a tin to drink from." "Then don't trouble yourself any further," I said, heartily, "for I'd rather drink from a tin cup than a goblet of pure gold." "And so would I," said the old man, reflectively, turning mechanically and following me down the path. "Druther drink out of a tin, or just a fruit can with the top knocked off, or a gourd," he added in a zestful, reminiscent tone of voice that so heightened my impatient thirst that I reached the spring house fairly in a run. "Well, sir," exclaimed my host, in evident delight, as I stood dipping my nose in the second cupful of the cool, revivifying liquid and peering in a congratulatory kind of way at the blurred and rubicund reflection of my features in the bottom of the cup. "Well, sir, blamed if it don't do a feller good to see you enjoyin' of it that-a-way. But don't you drink too much of the water, 'cause there's some sweet milk over there in one of them crocks, maybe. And if you'll just kinda careful like, lift off the lid of that third one, say, over there to your left, and dip you out a tinful or two of that, why, it'll do you good to drink it, and it'll do me good to see you at it. But hold up, he called, abruptly, as nowise loath I bent above the vessel designated. "Hold your horses for a second. Here's Marthy. Let her get it for you." If I was at first surprised and confused, meeting the master of the house, I was wholly startled and chagrined in my present position before its mistress. But as I arose and stammered in my confusion some incoherent apology, I was again reassured and put at greater ease by the comprehensive and forgiving smile the woman gave me, as I yielded her my place and, with lifted hat, awaited her further kindness. "I came just in time, sir," she said, half laughingly, as with strong bare arms she reached across the gurgling trough and replaced the lid that I had partially removed. "I came just in time, I see, to prevent father from having you dip into the morning's milk, which of course has scarcely a veil of cream over the face of it as yet. But men, as you are doubtless willing to admit," she went on jocularly, "don't know about these things. You must pardon father, as much for his well-meaning ignorance of such matters as for this cup of cream, which I am sure you will better relish." She arose, still smiling, with her eyes turned frankly on my own. And I must be excused when I confess that as I bowed my thanks, taking the proffered cup and lifting it to my lips, I stared with an uncommon interest and pleasure at the donor's face. She was a woman of certainly not less than 40 years of age. But the figure and the rounded grace and fullness of it, together with the features and the eyes, completed as fine a specimen of physical and mental health as ever it has been my fortune to meet. There was something so full of purpose and resolve, something so wholesome, too, about the character, something so womanly, I might almost say manly, and would, but for the petty prejudice maybe occasioned by the trivial fact of a locket having dropped from her bosom as she knelt. And that trinket still dangles in my memory, even as it then dangled and dropped back to its concealment in her breast as she arose. But her face, by no means handsome in the common meaning, was marked with a breadth and strength of outline and expression that approached the heroic. A face that once seen is forever fixed in memory. A personage once met, one must know more of. And so it was that an hour later, as I strolled with the old man about his farm, looking, to all intents, with the profoundest interest at his Devonshires, Shorthorns, Jerseys, and the like, I lured from him something of an outline of his daughter's history. "There's no better girl than Marthy," he said, mechanically answering some ingenious allusion to her worth. "And yet," he went on reflectively, stooping from his seat in the barn door and with his open jackknife picking up a little chip with the point of the blade, "and yet, you wouldn't believe it, but Marthy was the oldest of 3 daughters, and had, I may say, had more advantages of marrying, and yet, as I was just going to say, she's the very one that didn't marry. Had every advantage, Marthy did. Why, we even had her educated. Her mother was a living then. And we was well enough fixed to afford the educating of her, Mother always contended, and we was. Besides, it was Marthy's notion too, and you know how women is that-a-way when they get their heads set. So we sent Marthy down to Indianapolis, and got her books and put her in school there, and paid for her keeping and everything. And she just, well, you may say, lived there steady for better than 4 year. Course, she'd get back every once in a while, but her visits was always, someway or another, unsatisfactory like, 'cause, you see, Marthy was always my favorite, and I'd always laughed and told her that the other girls could get married if they wanted to, but she was going to be the nest egg of our family, and as long as I lived I wanted her at home with me. And she'd laugh and contend that she'd as lief be an old maid as not, and never expected to marry, nor didn't want to. But she had me scared once, though. Come out from the city one time, during the army, with a pert-looking young feller in blue clothes and gilt straps on his shoulders. Young lieutenant he was, name of Morris. Was layin' in camp there in the city somewheres. I disremember which camp it was now exactly, but anyway, it 'peared like he had plenty of time to go and come, for from that time on he kept on a-comin'. Every time Marthy would come home, he'd come too. And I got to noticin' that Marthy come home a good deal more than she used to afore Morris first brought her. And blame if the thing didn't get to worrying me. And once I spoke to Mother about it, and told her if I thought the feller wanted to marry Marthy, I'd just stop his coming right then and there. But Mother, she sort of smiled and said something about men and never seeing through nothing. And when I asked her what she meant, why, she ups and tells me that Morris didn't care nothing for Marthy, nor Marthy for Morris. And then went on to tell me that Morris was kind of edging up towards Annie. She was next to Marthy, you know, in point of years and experience, but everybody always said that Annie was the purtiest one of the whole 3 of them. And so, when Mother told me that the signs pointed towards Annie, why, of course, I had no particular objections to that, 'cause Morris was of good family enough, it turned out, and, in fact, was as stirring a young feller as ever I'd want for a son-in-law. And so, I had nothing more to say, nor they wasn't no occasion to say nothing, 'cause right along about then, I began to notice that Marthy quit coming home so much, and Morris kept a-comin' more. Till finally, one day he was out here all by himself, long about dusk, come out here where I was feedin' and asked me, all at once, and in a straightforward way, if he couldn't marry Annie. And, some way or another, blame if it didn't make me as happy as him when I told him yes. You see, that thing proved, pine blank, that he wasn't a fishin' round for Marthy. Well, sir, as luck would have it, Marthy got home about half-hour later, and I'll give you my word I was never so glad to see the girl in my life. It was foolish in me, I reckon, but when I see her driving up the lane, it was pert nigh dark then, but I could see her through the open winder from where I was settin' at the supper table, and so I just quietly excused myself, polite-like, as a feller will, you know, when they's company around, and I slipped off and met her just as she was about to get out to open the barn gate. "Hold up, Marthy," says I. "Sit right where you are. I'll open the gate for you, and I'll do anything else for you in the world that you want me to." "Why, Daddy, what's pleased you so?" she says, laughing as she drove through slow-like, and a tickling my nose with the cracker of the buggy whip. "What's pleased you?" "Guess," says I, jerking the gate to and turning to lift her out. "The new pianner's come?" says she, eager-like. "Your new pianner's come," says I, "but that's not it." "Strawberries for supper?" says she. "Strawberries for supper," says I, "but that ain't it either." Just then Morris's horse whinnied in the barn, and she glanced up quick and smiling and says, "Somebody come to see somebody?" "You're a-getting warm," says I. "Somebody come to see me?" she says, anxious-like. "No," says I, "and I'm glad of it too, for this one that's come wants to get married, and of course I wouldn't harbor in my house no young feller that was layin' round for a chance to steal away the nest egg," says I, laughing. Marthy had riz up in the buggy by this time, but as I held up my hands to her, she sort of drawed back a minute and says, all serious-like and kind of whispering, "Is it Annie?" I nodded. "Yes," says I, "and what's more, I've give my consent, and Mother's given hers. The thing's all settled. Come, jump out and run in and be happy with the rest of us." And I held out my hands again, but she didn't appear to take no heed. She was kind of pale, too, I thought, and swallered a time or two, like as if she couldn't speak plain. "Who is the man?" she asked. "Who's the man?" I says, a-getting kind of out of patience with the girl. "Why, you know who it is, of course. It's Morris," says I. "Come, jump down. Don't you see I'm waiting for you?" "Then take me," she says, and blamed if the girl didn't keel right over in my arms as limber as a rag. Clean fainted away. Honest, just the excitement, I reckon, of breaking it to her so sudden-like, 'cause she liked Annie, and I've sometimes thought, better'n even she did her own mother. Didn't go half so hard with her when her other sister married. "Yes, sir," said the old man, by way of sweeping conclusion, as he rose to his feet. "Marthy's the only one of 'em that never married. Both the others is gone. Morris went all through the army and got back safe and sound. They's living in Idaho and doing first rate. Sends me a letter every now and then. Got 3 little chunks of grandchildren out there, and I never laid eyes on one of 'em. You see, I'm a-getting to be quite a middle-aged man. In fact, a very middle-aged man, you might say. Since Mother died, which has been, let me see, Mother's been dead somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 years. Since Mother died, I've been getting more and more of Marthy's notion. That is, you couldn't ever hire me to marry nobody. And them has always been, and still is, the nest egg's views. Listen, that's her a-calling for us now. You must sort of overlook the freedom, but I told Marthy you'd promised to take dinner with us today, and it would never do to disappoint her now. Come on. And it would have made the soul of you either rapturously glad or madly envious to see how meekly I consented. I am always thinking that I never tasted coffee till that day. I am always thinking of the crisp and steaming rolls poured over with the molten gold that hinted of the clover fields, and the bees that had not yet permitted the honey of the bloom and the white blood of the stalk to be divorced. I am always thinking that the young and tender pullet we happy three discussed was a near and dear relative of the patrician rooster that I first caught peering so inquisitively in at the kitchen door. And I am always thinking of the nest egg. And that concludes James Whitcomb Riley's 1913 story called The Nest Egg. As suggested in the introduction, have you ever had or have you ever been a nest egg like Martha? Does the moral of this story change depending on whether you are the parent or the child? Give us your thoughts in the comments section. This is John T. Rhapsodies Esquire, purveyor of awesome old-school audio stories. Thank you for listening. You can find more stories like this in the channel's playlists. Find them by staying tuned for the last 20 seconds of this video and clicking on the end screen icons. You can also go to the channel homepage and click on the playlist tab. If you like this story and would like to hear more, please help me earn the warm embrace of Mr. and Mrs. YouTubes who look with loving favor upon those channels whose listeners faithfully subscribe, like, comment, click the notification bell, and share the videos with their friends so that they too can hear the words of old.